Low pass rates are not something to brag about. I have known a couple of professors, and heard of many more, that will talk about having a low pass rate either for exams or the class as a bragging point. I understand that a class should be engaging and challenging and am of the opinion a degree needs to be earned. However, at a certain point a line needs to drawn. It reflects poorly on you as a teacher. Either your tests are unfair or something else you are doing is obstructing the class. I would love to hear other opinions on this. Response 1.
It's like people who brag about how much work they do and how little sleep and free time they get.
I get up at 5 a.m. every single day, or 1 hour before you, whichever is earlier. I work 87 hours per week. I haven't laughed in 9 years.
Damn bro, I have been living a similar life like yours. The college keeps seeking you every day.
Ha, college. Would love to go back to that cakewalk. I took the hardest professors and did 17 hours of homework per hour. Worked 3 jobs. Got a perfect GPA.
Deleted.
Brushed your teeth while having sex? That seems like sort of a rub your stomach and pat your head at the same time type situation. I feel like at some point, a lot could go wrong. A lot.
I mean, what did you think motorized toothbrushes were for?
Response 2.
2 semesters ago I was in a class of 25. The first day the professor asked which of us were taking the class because we'd failed his class the first time around. 18 people raised their hand. It was the most intense semester of my life.
How many of you know I as a professor suck? All kidding aside, I took Calculus 3 one summer and the class started out with 45 people and ended with 11. We had a semester-long group project, 6 in a group. I was the only one left in the group to do the project. Professor was like, sucks to be you doing 6 people's work, but what y'all gonna do? Cheat the hell out of that class was my response. Once I had all the answers for tests and homework I could focus on that dang group project.
I'm curious about what group project a calculus class had. Was it creative, or just a massive problem set?
It had to do with proofs. Each group had to research a different proof and answer a bunch of questions about it like it was our own proof. I think mine had to do something with a triple integral and how it was associated with the area of the shadow of an expanding sphere over a bumpy plane. Essentially come up with the equation to answer some crazy concept question and back it up with lots of maths. Edit, it happened in 2006 so I'm a bit fuzzy on all the details.
Response 3.
If an instructor brags about this I drop their class. Edit, who knew choosing to go to an instructor that isn't hostile would be so triggering?
Unless you don't have a choice, that's really the best way to go. If you pass, you end up with a grade that's worse than other people got with different instructors, and if you fail, your GPA is shot until you retake the class.
My last few semesters, I started signing up for extra classes so I had my pick of the litter for which professor I drop. It made for a stressful first week or 2 where I had to show up to a ton of classes and decide which ones I wasn't going to continue with, but it was totally worth it when it saved me from awful teachers. My last semester all the classes were fine so I dropped a professor 100% because she was a mouth breather who wheezed slightly when she exhaled. See how interesting your class is. I'm not sitting through 3 months of that.
That's a good idea. I ask advisors about the personalities of instructors and rate my professor. I've gone as far as meeting a professor before taking the class as well. Listening to a lecture is so important, and if their voice is annoying or hard to understand then it's not going to be a good environment to learn.
Response 4.
Why the hell would that be a bragging point that makes them look bad?
Professors don't want to be at the end of the spectrum in which a professor is known for easy exams and essentially an easy A, so instead of choosing the middle they decide to go to the opposite end of the spectrum where they boast about how hard they make the students work for their grade.
I've often seen that professors try to increase the difficulty of a class by just testing on content not taught or giving less time for tests. If a professor tries to increase the difficulty of his class tests without increasing the complexity of thought required, then that professor is pathetic emo. There's a difference between making tests classes harder or making them unfair.
My fluid dynamics professor made his tests so that no one would get a 100% due to length and difficulty. His theory was that if 2 people get a 100% you cannot know who knew the material better. The average test grades were 40–60%.
Ooh, that reminds me of the teacher I had for Intro to Theoretical Computer Science. God gave us 101 grades, and I believe he intended us to use all of them. I passed the class, but it wasn't a fun one.
That's so stupid. He's basically saying he wants people in his class to know less than half of the material on the test.
Response 5.
Making a class rigorous, difficult, is something to celebrate if it means students are meeting the learning goals. Making a class difficult solely so you can fail people is a sin. Making a class so difficult that large percentages of people fail and then keeping it that way over time is simply irresponsible. As a department chair, I monitor the overall GPAs assigned by my colleagues. If I had one who was routinely failing large numbers of students, we'd be having a serious conversation about his course design, pedagogy, and suitability for teaching in our department. If you intentionally design and deliver a class your students cannot succeed in, you have no business being a teacher. Yes, they must earn the credit, and yes, there should be a significant distribution of grades, but bragging about failing students is, in my experience, more a sign of a failed professor. In my department, we try to calibrate our courses so that on average we're awarding 10% of grades, because officially A equals excellent. We also seek to fail no student who does the minimum that we ask, i.e. if they pass all the assignments and attend the class they will likely earn a D. Intentionally designing a class that large numbers of students cannot pass is the academic equivalent of malpractice.
If only my AP Calc professor in senior year knew this. I had to drop his class cause I was failing. If you had an F for more than a week, he'd remove you from the class. He nearly cost me my acceptance and scholarship. Fucking college calc has been easier than his damned class by a long shot.
My calc teacher put us through hell, but we got to choose our grade at the end as long as we did all the work. It took the pressure off and made learning calc fun.
Response 6.
While I don't agree with bragging about a class being difficult, I think in recent years there has been a push to increase students' grades. No longer is a 3.0 GPA really considered that impressive, because in lots of majors course averages are a B+ or A. Grade inflation is a real problem, and students tend to complain about their grades when they don't get an A on every single assignment. It's only getting worse as the years go on. Maybe you interpreted it as bragging, but I've had professors in the past who made it clear that they don't just hand out A's and that it's okay to get lower marks on assignment because of the difficult nature of the material. Professor might be a dick for bragging about how they grade lower, but I don't think the tests are unfair or he's doing something wrong just because they are stricter on grading. If anything, the teachers that basically hand out A's are the ones in the wrong, in my opinion.
I agree with your point on grade inflation. I think what is considered a normal GPA has gotten out of hand. However, a lot of majors have higher GPA requirements than the rest of UT. These REQs would need to lower slightly with the standard GPA. Until these professors essentially put you at higher risk.
How bad is this grade inflation? Here in my part of Canada, professors who inflate grades would probably be in serious trouble.
Check out gradeinflation.com. Look at the GPAs at Ivy Leagues especially.
Wouldn't Ivy Leagues have more of the type of people who would earn an A? If you're giving A's based on if some deserved it, it makes more sense for a competitive to get into school to have a high percentage of A's.
The average GPA used to be a 2.5 at Harvard. Now it's 3.65. It's not because kids are getting smarter. Look up grade inflation and Vietnam War, and then grade inflation and consumer model of education.
Do you really think the population at Harvard now is the same as it's always been? The school annually grows its applications from highly qualified students from around the globe, a far cry from when only a small segment of the population of the United States could even hope to be considered for acceptance. There are other factors that contribute to grade inflation, but I would urge you not to cavalierly dismiss the idea that the students themselves are different than they used to be.
Response 7.
This reminds me of my favorite college professor, who is now a very close friend years later. He has usually had one of the highest pass rates of any English professor at the universities where he has taught, and ironically it's been a serious hindrance to his career. His classes aren't easy by any means. His pass rates are high because he works damn hard to make sure every student can understand and relate to the subject matter and so is prepared for the exams. Watching someone so dedicated, so talented, go through hell just because he is actually a good teacher is the reason I decided not to go into academia.
Response 8.
One of my new favorite tweets something along the lines of, Professor, rarely anyone gets A's in this course. Me, weird flex but okay.
I had a food science professor say something like that and it really motivated me. I ended up with an A in that class and it was one of my proudest moments. At the other end of the spectrum, my microbio professor bragged about his class weeding people out. The average exam scores were around 40%, and I ended up with a D, technically passing but still messed up my GPA for grad school.
Fuck, that's a real bummer. I'm retaking Ds from last fall right now because my department is anal about the focus course GPAs.
Response 9.
The counterpoint is something like an engineering or medical course where the subject matter is inherently difficult, and if students pass without internalizing the course, then people might die. Yeah, the professor should be trying real hard to get every student to learn the material, but sometimes the subject matter is hard, and scaring people with the pass rate in the first lecture might get them to take the course a bit more seriously.
Also, to expand on this, if you don't like the subject material and are doing poorly, maybe it is time to reflect on what matters and what you are working towards. Just because it seems like there is a ton of money in it, in reality, the answer as Wall Street stockbroker, doesn't necessarily mean you want to spend the next 30 years staring at the lower intestine of sick people.
Bruh, brokers don't make shit now. This ain't 2008.
Response 10.
Disclosure, I am currently a mathematics professor. In general, and I can only speak for the colleagues I know well, we hate our low pass rates. While unreasonable, we enter into every semester with the optimistic delusion that this semester, everyone will get it. Everyone will put in the work. Everyone will approach the class as if they were there on purpose. Yet, as the weeks pass and the attrition begins, we are left to face a sad reality where we lose half or more of the bright faces and eager minds we began with. What I have observed in my career can perhaps be explained by a difference of goals. As a professor, I want each and every student to learn all, and I do mean all, of the material for the course. I consider it a personal failure when a student doesn't. But I would consider it an ethical violation if a student were to pass without learning the material. This is, I feel, where the disconnect lies. If you give the typical student a choice between learning the material and passing the course, they will choose passing the course every time. Students now attend college not to learn, but to get a degree, as if they are purchasing a license to enter the workforce. As a side note, I believe personally that we are requiring college degrees for far too many entry-level positions today. This difference of view creates a contentious relationship where professors are seen as barriers to getting a job instead of useful resources to improve one's mental abilities. I don't have a solution to this, sadly. But I can leave all students reading this with some advice: go talk to your professors. Go to class. Do all of your assignments. At least pretend to take an interest in your classes. Because at the end of the day, our greatest joy is seeing a spark of joy from a small student's success become an insatiable hunger for knowledge. I apologize for the long post, thank you for reading.
I'm currently an aerospace engineering student in their final year. And what I've found is that the best exams, for actually making sure you know your shit, are actually designed to be pretty straightforward if you know the material, but virtually impossible to get a good grade in if there's a gap in your understanding. The bad ones are where the exam is difficult purely by the convoluted wording of questions and problems, but the solutions is pretty trivial. That's just making something harder than it should for the sake of it. Normally the result of a well-written exam seems to be a wide range of results, with few getting the top grades and some failing, with the average being a more normal grade. A bad exam will have the majority of people fail or come close to failing, with very few people achieving even a normal grade.
Response 11.
Filtering out students is archaic. It's 50s education where we needed to separate white collar from blue collar. It persists, though we no longer should filter students, because it's an easier way to get your education check. Give a multiple choice test, grade it on a curve, and you're done. Teach for a piece of paper and your students will also chase paper. There is a movement to teach for learning, but it's fighting years of tradition.